One. Okay. We have one hiccup. Shakira, I do not have my share function on. Thank you so much. All right, everybody can see my screen?
I think we're good to go.
We're good to go. All right, thank you. Okay. So as I said, my name is Theodore Rose. I am the Legislative and Policy Director, and I will be doing this presentation with Femi Akin Dumila, our Outreach Fellow here at the Council. The presentation today will focus on two main areas for us. We'll do an overview of the 2021 Minnesota legislative sessions, and we will also like to give some updates on COVID-19 and its uncertain aftermaths here in Minnesota and in the country, around the world, because that's a really critical issue for us during this legislative year. So the regular session was convened in January 5th, 2021, and it went through May 17th and adjourned May 17th, 2021. Minnesota convenes a regular session each odd numbered year on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in January, which is sort of convoluted, but basically in early January on odd number years, the legislative session, regular session begins. And each 2-year term of the House is considered one legislative session. So for the first part of that 2-year term, so for instance, this year, 2021, we have the first. It makes up the first year, so to speak, and they could convene again next year, and the legislature can and will convene next year to continue the work of the 2-year term. It's a budget year, and basically what that means is that even numbered years are referred to as bonding years informally, and odd number years are referred to as budgeting years in Minnesota. And the Minnesota, basically in the state enacts its budgets on 2-year cycles. And so beginning July 1st of each odd number year, that's when a new state budget is enacted. The governor proposes a biennial budget in January and of the odd number years, and the state legislator must pass a 2-year state budget during the regular session of the odd number years, or at the very least, it must be done by June 30th of that year. So, but this year, although we had different versions of the budget bills that were passed in the House and the Senate, so that, I mean, they went through those committee processes and actually went through the House and the Senate, no budget bill actually made it through the conference committee process. So I'm looking at one last thing. I mean, so before I hand it to Femi, one key thing is that before the regular session ended, the top 3 leaders in the state, the governor, the Senate Majority Leader, and Speaker of the House, actually came to an agreement, what they call the global agreement, where they announced that they had developed some terms for how to proceed with working on the budget after the regular session ended. So I'll pass it on to Femi to take over from there.
Sounds good. Thank you, Theo. So speaking of the special session, just a quick historical context. Minnesota hasn't, special sessions are quite rare in our history. The last time Minnesota went through a special session was in 2011, so they're quite rare, and the legislature works really hard during the normal session to prevent this. Special sessions began on June 14th to July 1st, and so the main objective of this legislation was to pass the Minnesota state budget, because the consequence, if that wasn't passed, was that many state employees would be laid off and many state functions would not be carried out unless the state budget is passed. So to do that, the legislator, the House of Representatives, and the Senate got together again, and they began deliberations and preparing budget bills. And in this special session, about 11 budget bills were passed, and those can vary from jobs and labor, public safety, education, a wide variety of issues were talked and discussed. And thankfully, before the deadline, a budget was passed. Within that vein, here at CMAH, we had priorities and bills that we really fought for and advocated for. Along those were bills related to education, health and safety, to jobs and labor, and public safety. So those were some of the critical priorities and areas that we really were focusing and advocating for. And so now we can pivot from the special session. It's now talking about COVID and its uncertain aftermath. We could talk briefly about the COVID peacetime emergency. So on June 30th, 2021, the governor felt comfortable enough to remove his peacetime emergencies. And along with that, one of the key areas was the housing memorandum. And as he was ending his peacetime emergency powers, the Senate and the Congress and the governor came together and they made an off-ramp plan to make sure that while these emergency powers might be gone or limited, that our Minnesotans still have access to the emergency food assistance to make sure that Minnesotans have the aid and the assistance that they need. And I can pass it off to Theo to talk about our next slide.
All right, and let me just add on regarding that the actual decision to end those emergency powers, that's really important for what transpired at the end of the special session. And that was, as with everything that happened at the end there in terms of developments during that special session, it was based on bipartisan agreements. And so in order for that decision to be made, the governor, through his leadership, had to work with the federal government to come up with a deal to continue those federal emergency food assistance that Femi was referring to. And really importantly, Minnesota receives $45 million each month in emergency food assistance from the USDA. And during the course of this emergency declaration, we've gotten in our state $500 million in emergency food aid under that emergency. So ending that and making sure that some of that support continues was very, very important. I mean, each month the figure is that about 282,000 households are supported with nutrition through this type of a program. And another key area another key policy area during this special session and during this year was the end of the eviction moratorium in Minnesota, which also that ending came to be on June 30th, 2021. And that was Article 5 of the Omnibus Housing Budget that provided for the ending of that moratorium. The bipartisan agreement that basically end, I mean, again, it's a bipartisan agreement that basically ends the governor's executive order that was placed emergency pause, so to speak, on eviction actions and lease terminations. The bill created what was called an off-ramp or timeline for policy provisions that will help eligible renters get caught up with overdue rent and utility bills that go back to March of 2020, March 13th of 2020, at the start of the pandemic. And so that's a really important measure there. And the long and short of it is that though the eviction moratorium ended on June 30th, renters are protected against eviction actions, specifically for non-payment of rent through June 2022. So if you're eligible, you're protected if you have an application pending for rental assistance with the state. And really importantly, if you want more information about this or to apply for rental assistance, please contact Rent Help Minnesota at renthelpminnesota.org or call the 211 helpline. All right, and the other sort of key area that we want to touch on regarding COVID is what we see as good news in terms of Minnesota's leadership in the U.S. response to the COVID crisis. Minnesota has been a leader among states in the response to COVID. On the 1st of July, Minnesota reached the national goal set by President Biden and the CDC to vaccinate 70% of the state's 18 and older population. That goal was set for July 4th, and we reached that by July 1st. Very important. Also very important to mention that while we do have that higher rate of vaccination compared to some other states, it's really important for the unvaccinated to get vaccinated. So we are calling on folks to get all Minnesotans who are eligible for the COVID vaccine should get vaccinated. Throughout the pandemic, also, the Mayo Clinic of Rochester remained one of the top performing hospitals in the country. And last month, U.S. News and World Report recognized Mayo as the best hospital in the United States during this emergency. And so that's a very important honor for the Mayo Clinic and for our state in terms of the response to the COVID crisis. At the same time, we want to highlight some key challenges that our state and really the nation and globally that we continue to face with regards to COVID. We do see an upward trend in COVID cases, infections, and hospitalizations in Minnesota. Public health officials say that the Delta variant of the virus is fueling the latest wave of COVID cases in our state. And the key thing here is that researchers find that the Delta variant is more virulent than the previous coronavirus variants. And that basically means that it's more contagious, it's easier to spread. So there are risks, there are major risks and uncertainties of the pandemic that remain with us, that are still with us. Finally, I want to conclude here. I think that we want to emphasize that the vaccines are the best tool that we have for fighting against COVID. Many people remain are not vaccinated. I mean, including young children who are not actually approved or eligible to be vaccinated. So we have vulnerable populations among us. There are localities with high concentrations of unvaccinated people that can spread the virus and also cause outbreaks, and we're seeing that in other states. So we still face the risk of hospitals getting overwhelmed, of schools having to close, especially as the new school year nears us here, and of the virus continuing, to, get worse in terms of developing even graver, more potent variants. So there's still a very important critical need for public conversation at the national, state, and local level about how to support people during during these uncertainties, these uncertain times, particularly how to support underserved communities, including communities like ours. So I will end the presentation there so we can move on to the next segment of our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am excited to be here, and if you are here, I'm excited to have you here. So we are going to punt just a little bit because we are waiting for Representative Demuth to join us. But in the meantime, I will go ahead and introduce our first panel. Our panel today, the first panel is called Building Strong Families and Communities. And then we're also going to talk about closing the education and achievement gap. Our first panelist for the day is Representative Esther Agbaje. Representative Agbaje of District 59B is currently serving her first term in the Minnesota State House of Representatives, so congratulations on that. She is a negotiator, a lawyer, and a former program manager who advocates tirelessly for her constituents. And I've seen her out there. She's out there hitting the pavement, right? In the previous session, Agbaje was the vice chair of the Rules and Legislative Administration Committee and was very active on housing and finance policy. Welcome, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you very much.
We will also have Representative Lisa Demuth. Representative Demuth of District 13A is currently serving her second term on the Minnesota State House of Representatives. She is a small business owner who understands the value of hard work and the Central Minnesota values. So we're excited to have someone who is actually outside of the Twin Cities representing our people as well. In the previous session, Demuth was on the Early Childhood Finance and Policy Committee and helped introduce several bills aimed at improving the education and living standards of all Minnesotans. So I'm not sure if Representative Demuth has jumped online. She's expected any minute. So we will welcome her when she arrives. And I believe we'll just jump right in. What do you say, Theo?
Yes, please. So I think, thank you so much, Linda. We have Representative Agbaje on at this time. So Representative Agbaje, I think that we can begin. We're also expecting Representative Demuth to join us, but we can begin maybe with some introductory remarks by you about your just introducing yourself and your experience during the session and what you got from it in terms of your general efforts and the results for the session.
Yeah, happy to do that, Theo. Just want to say hi, everyone who's watching online. As stated in the introduction, I represent House District 59B, which covers the area of downtown Minneapolis and then parts of the north side up to West Broadway Avenue. And so really grateful for this past first year of working on really critical issues, particularly through the Housing Committee and the Capital Investment Committee and the Taxes Committee. So those are three committees that I had the pleasure to serve on this year. I think, this first session, I don't have anything to compare it to. We were still, we're still in a pandemic. So we were very much in the height of that before more vaccines got online. So most of the time we spent kind of like this behind the screen, getting to know our colleagues as well as getting to know how the system works up there. This year I did have a chance to work on a number of really crucial bills. I put forward a number of bills, particularly around tenants' rights, making sure that tenants could kind of have more of a level playing field with landlords, particularly once they're engaged in the court system around evictions. So we wanted to see a lot of protections increased around what notice looked like if you're facing an eviction, getting your record expunged. So if you had an eviction on your record, but wanting to make sure that it was easier to get that expunged, because we know that having those eviction records makes it harder to find more decent and stable housing, while also wanting to ensure that the court system itself was simpler for people to access and understand should they be in it. So we'll still be working on those bills when we come back next year for the 22 session, which is more of a policy-oriented year. I was also honored to carry the African American Family Preservation Act, which I think we'll probably talk about a little bit more here today as well. But it's basically an act to make sure that Child Protective Services and the counties are working more closely in a culturally informed manner to make sure that children are able to stay with their families, or if it's not with their parents, with maybe other relatives who can take them in. We know that too often these systems will default to separating children from their families because there may not be a cultural understanding of what family looks like in different communities. So we want to make sure that kids are staying with people who know who they are, can care for them, and can give them that stable environment. So that's something that we're still working on. I'm also carrying what's known as the Crown Act. So that's a national movement to make sure that Black hair, African hair, is not seen as something that you can discriminate against a person for. So wanting to make sure that that is explicitly protected in Minnesota law. So that will be coming up as well. And then, as was mentioned during the slideshow, in the Housing Committee, most of our efforts were again focused on the eviction moratorium. So that has been a major concern as the pandemic keeps moving, particularly with how to make sure tenants stay housed, how to make sure landlords, especially some of these smaller landlords, still get the rent money that they're owed. And so at a variety of levels of government, we've all been working together to make sure that people stay home. And so on the off-ramp or the phase out of the eviction moratorium in Minnesota, we still have until October before all evictions are eligible to be done through the court system. But in that, as we stated before, and I can't state it again, even more, is just we want to make sure that people are applying for that rent help, because once you're in line for that rent help, you can't be evicted from your place right now. And that's really what we want to make sure people are doing. We know that the money is coming out slowly. We know that that's definitely still an issue, but we want to make sure that people are at least in line for that money. So as we're working on figuring out how to move those funds out faster, people are still, they're not out on the street or in shelters where they don't need to be. A couple of other really nice bills that I got passed this year, also in the housing space, making sure that homeowners, if they want the amount of loans that they're eligible for if they are doing rehabilitation on their property, is now increased from $27,000 to $35,000. And then also a bill on storage units. So sometimes people who are kind of in between spaces, they might be leaving a domestic violence situation, they might find themselves unhoused for a little bit, or it might be a small business owner that needs a place to keep their tools. We are making sure that the laws are updated around storage units, so that way, should you become delinquent on that, you're not going to be evicted through the landlord-tenant process, and the amount of money in terms of the value of your property has increased that you can get back from the storage facility. So those are the types of things I've been working on this year. Really looking forward to more work, particularly in the environmental justice space and in our capital investment space, of making sure that our communities also have similar access to funding to acquire buildings, update buildings, to build those places and those spaces where people can come together and receive resources. So happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Representative, and thank you for your leadership work on those very important issues. I think we can get into some discussion about the housing components of that work. So first of all, just with regards to the eviction moratorium, the off ramp. I mean, what's called the off ramp that you were referring to in the rent help. Can you say more about, I mean, the process for getting the negotiations around that, and if you can let us in a little bit to the you know, the perspectives in that debate and why you think it's important, you know, to have this off ramp and to really support rental assistance in the state.
Yeah, the negotiations around this were definitely, I think we were coming from very different perspectives of who needed to be helped the most in this process. So I would say a number of Democratic colleagues were very much focused on ensuring that tenants, families, people could stay in their homes. They weren't having to face this additional stress of an eviction, and also face the additional stress that an eviction causes to a person and a family. Whereas our Republican colleagues were very much focused on, we have a number of smaller landlords who are small business owners, and in many times renting is a livelihood for them. And so they were not getting the income that they had originally thought that they would get. I think, you know, there's a lot of conversation that can be had about which perspective should have weighed more, I guess, during a pandemic, during the emergency that we were in. But what we were able to do is we were able to figure out ways to come together and figure out what was most important. And what was really most important was, I think from a number of people, was making sure that people had the resources that they needed, which was from a financial perspective, because tenants didn't want that money, because many people, as we all know from COVID, either suffered a loss of hours from their job, maybe a cut in income, or lost their income entirely. And so when that happens, you can't really think about anything else. And so I think it was really good on behalf of the governor and also even the federal government of saying that we need to halt these, you know, evictions from happening, because we didn't want to create an even further crisis down the line. Some of the things that I've been learning as I've talked to more realtors, more landlords, is they were really just really interested in making sure that they could still sustain their livelihood, but also still maintain the properties that they own, to make sure it was a safe living space for people. At least a lot of people really were concerned about that. And what I found out is also through the federal government, some of those property owners were actually eligible for mortgage relief from the federal government as well. So there were a number of things at play that could help people. And so when we were in our discussions at the state level, one of the things I was advocating for was having a off-ramp or a phase down that was as long as possible, because we wanted to make sure that we were getting the information out to people and that people weren't feeling scared or pressured. In my work as an attorney, volunteering, one of the things you see in the eviction space is that people kind of come forward at the last minute because they are worried about the stigma associated with eviction. They're worried that they don't know where to go. They may not want to reach out to people because of a variety of reasons. And so we wanted to create that time frame that allowed more people to hear about this information, know where they could go, and be able to access those resources. Because we have, I think the last count I heard is that we have around $600 million that's to the state of Minnesota to help renters. And so we want to make sure that people have that time and that ability to access that. So that's kind of how those negotiations went. That was where our sticking points were on how long it should be, how quickly landlords could start evicting people, and what type of evictions could move forward. So right now, we're in the part of the phase down where if you are a danger to yourself and others, if you're engaging in criminal activity, or if you are ineligible for COVID assistance, you can be evicted right now. But for people who are eligible for COVID assistance, and really the only reason for an eviction is non-payment of rent, you still have protection until about mid-October. So I'm still encouraging everyone to go to renthelpmn.org, call 211, reach out to your neighborhood organizations. There are a lot of people willing to help tenants, ready to help tenants be able to fill out this application and make sure that they're in line for funding.
You know, yeah, thank you so much for that breakdown. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting about the housing provisions that were passed is how they attempt to deal with that issue of information about the assistance, right? About the support that's available. So, and maybe I don't know if you can help us speak a little bit to that, but I mean, I think that issue of stigma on the one hand, and then just whether it's not stigma, it's just the lack of knowledge about, you know, the kind of support that's out there, is a critical thing for our community, for underserved communities in general. And so I mean, I think that one of the requirements is that before an eviction action can be taken, there has to be some language provided from the landlord to the tenant about the support that's available, I believe.
So that was actually a really big win. So we have been trying to get notice before evictions in Minnesota for years, and the closest we've gotten, so I hope that it's a good harbinger of the future, is during this time period, so basically from June 30th to October 13th or so, a landlord, if they are going to evict you particularly for non-payment of rent issues, they need to provide you what's called a 15-day notice. On that 15-day notice should have information about where to seek help for rental assistance, why you're being evicted, and kind of what the process is, and how like it won't start until the next 15 days if you basically don't come up with some other type of remedy and agreement with your landlord. So I think that's really crucial, because that does help provide people a sense of knowing that they still have some time. I hope they don't use the whole 15 days to go find help, but like, that's a really big wake up call to say, okay, this is the time for me to go reach out to people, seek help, call these phone numbers, and figure out what I can do. And I think that's really important.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know
Theo,
if Linda or maybe.
Yeah, Theo, before you move on,
Right.
I believe that Representative Demuth has joined us, but by phone.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think that she has the capability to speak. So Representative Demuth, if you want to say hello, you can do so at this time, and then we can continue on with the panel discussion.
Yeah, and please,
Hi, this is Representative Demuth.
Yeah, welcome, Representative. Please, we want to give you some time to make some introductory remarks for our panel and for the live audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. If you could just verify, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
We are.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My apologies for not being able to sign in on the WebEx. I have tried for the last 15 minutes and it is not working, but thankful for this opportunity. Again, thank you for the opportunity. If I could just make some very brief remarks, this legislative session has been challenged in so many different ways, but just like everyone else that has dealt with both the pandemic and the unrest and all things that we're being faced with, we're all working very, very hard. And so as things wrapped up legislatively with our special session at the very end of June, almost the beginning of the first day of July, there were some things that were good. There was a lot of work that maybe those of us that had different perspectives on things that we wanted to get done. But if I could just touch on a couple of things that I think were real wins that are helpful for our community in the area of early childhood. And I serve on that committee, and I've had the privilege to do so. We know that when we're giving families a solid start and our kids a solid start, it translates and it is better for everyone. And so specifically out of the Select Committee on Racial Justice, the attention that was given to the increased numbers of maternal morbidity. One of the things that we did that I was so happy to see go through is that extending the coverage for postpartum for women on MA up to 1 year. We know before that it had only been 6 weeks. There was a proposal that was only going to be about 10 months. We were able to get that through in the 1 year area, and that makes definite strong starts for families. Also, there was additional grant funding for education on the healthy development for babies. That's an improvement. As I had mentioned before, I had the privilege also of serving on the Family Child Care Task Force, and we had a number of provisions that came out of that that we're able to go through. One that I had carried in 19 and it didn't make it through, but it did make it through at the end of special session, was creating an office of ombudsperson for family child care providers. And that's an advocate for family child care providers. We know as each one of us need to get to work or to school, we need quality, affordable child care in an area that's going to help our kids with their healthy brain development, but also provide that care that's needed. And family child care providers were dropping off quite a bit. This is an effort to help stand up that industry, both the providers that are choosing to do it and then our families as we need to access that. So creating that office of ombudsperson is a great area that will help with that, with maybe correction orders or areas that providers are finding difficulty with. They have that advocate there at a state level. We also did quite a bit of work in that area with modernizing some of our family child care regulations, the Family Child Care Training and Advisory Committee. We made some changes to licensing to allow up to 4 licenses at one location, which is a benefit there. That's just a very high level snapshot on that. And then as far as the work that we did in education, both in our early childhood all the way through K-12, the investments that we made were historic, really. We were able to get 2.45% increase on the first year and then 2% on the second year. The total spending of that bill was over $2 billion. And what I want to make sure people understand is our education, our E-12 education funding is 41% of our state budget. And we got some really, really great things in there as far as new investments into grants and encouraging. One of the areas that I know we did some work, but I still think is really important is, as I've talked about before, the last in and first out with our teachers. We know that our newer teachers, we have a higher percentage of teachers of color in our newer teachers, but yet because of the seniority, we know that they're the first ones to be let go. So that's work that I'm continuing to focus on as we go into the 22 session. But with that, I have just a couple of moments that I'm willing to take questions or if there's any other direction, but it was a good wrap up to the session, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you for that, Representative Demuth, and thank you so much for your leadership work this year. Very, very important, critical work. I just wanted for you to share a little bit more with us, and also Representative Agbaje, I'll also open the table to you as well. Regarding the new and increased support in early childhood. And also, family and home visiting in the HHS budget bill. Do you think that those provisions? I mean, those are critical provisions. What's your perspective on whether they go far enough or whether we need additional or a different set of steps that we need to take in the coming years?
And this is Representative Demuth again. I would be happy to add a couple of comments to that.
Yes.
I think that the work that we did this year was good. It was a good start. One of the things that is really important to me is when we look at the pathway 1 and 2 and the difference between the scholarships for family child care or child care for kids, even if it's at a center. We know that sometimes the scholarships will go directly to the center, which is an important piece, but we know that a lot of times if families are accessing help with childcare, sometimes they're going to be in transit. They're going to maybe move cities, they're going to move counties, and so it's a real priority to me that we would make sure that the additional childcare funding can go with the child to access that childcare. So that's one area that I'll continue to commit to work on. Does it go far enough? We do know that home visiting is really important for healthy starts, and I think the pandemic brought that out. Could more be done? Absolutely. But I think where we're at a good spot right now, and I'm happy to listen if Representative Agbaje would like to add to that.
No, I think that's great. That's all in your wheelhouse, Representative Demuth.
Thank you.
Cool. On the there are two things, Representative Demuth, that you raised that I definitely would like your more perspective on, and I think it would be very useful for the community. In terms of your work in the child care domain, and the support to aid child care providers and to really improve child care in the state. Can you speak to just your thoughts on ways in which that benefits the African heritage community here in the state, and just BIPOC communities more generally, so the kinds of needs that these communities face, and that's one. And then also, I mean, in terms of the investments in education, I mean, the tremendous investments in education that the bipartisan bill landed on, which is, I mean, great. That issue that you raised about teachers of color, and the debate around that, I really would like your perspective on there was some funding increases in support of increasing teachers of color in the state, some programs, but the broader Increased Teachers of Color Act legislation, the more comprehensive legislation, some of the policy language and some of the targets there did not make it into the final education budget bills. And so I would really like your perspective on some of the debates around that in the education domain.
Sure, thank you for the question. I'll talk specifically as far as the family child care and the work in that area and how it specifically relates to our BIPOC communities. Without a doubt, we need flexibility in our child care, how we can access that, how it's delivered, how it can work with our parents and their school and their employment schedules. We know not everyone fits into that, 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We need flexibility in there. And so by ensuring that our child care providers can meet the needs of our community, I think benefits all. There's something called family, friend, and neighbor providers, and that is being looked at also. And so when you have, and I'm part of the Prenatal to 3 forum that Chair Pinto chairs, but when you look at family, friends, and neighbors that are also willing to step up and fill that void for families, whether it's to cover a few hours or an entire work or school schedule, whatever that looks like, we need to make sure that those are safe environments for kids, that they're being taught, and I don't mean curriculum necessarily, but that active play that is so good for healthy brain development. So as we continue the work in the child care space, I think that's really important to realize that it benefits our BIPOC community, it benefits all of our communities. We know if we're giving our kids healthy starts, even before they get to preschool, they're going to have a better chance at success as they hit that preschool, kindergarten, and then on through that area there. So that is a few of my comments to that specific question. As far as the investments that we made into, Black Men Teach grants and the other things that we wanted to do to make sure that we were increasing our teachers of color, I appreciate the dollars that we've put into those and the grants that are available. But what I can tell you, when I had mentioned the last in, first out, what I mean by that is districts, when they are hiring their staff, if they have to make staff reductions at the end of the year, looking into the next year, whether it's to do with the reduction of the number of students or whatever that is, the way it works is actually the first teachers that are hired are the first ones to be let go. So we can be putting all of our money in to increase our teachers of color, to gain more teachers of color, but if we're not letting them know that, but by the way, we're going to hire you, but if we have to make cuts because you're a new teacher, you might be the first one to be let go because of the way the seniority works. That's where I think we are actually pouring money almost into a leaky bucket in a way. The investments on the front are fine and they're good, but I think we need to ensure that we're keeping teachers that best connect with our students, that are being kept because of their ability to do their job and to do it well. That's the piece that I was talking about that I think that we have a lot of room to still move and make improvements on.
Thank you very much, Representative. I think that just as a final set of questions, we want to ask both Representative Agbaje and Representative Demuth some specific priorities, whether they be future priorities or things that, as you look back on, that you want to continue that didn't pan out these past several months, but you want to continue moving forward. If there's specific priorities, some call to action that you want to give to the community, and then also how community members can really help and support your work.
I'm happy to go first. I think some of the things that are still sort of left on the table are in spaces around making sure that people have their basic necessities, particularly around housing, particularly around food security, education for our kids. As we're going into this fall, I think one of the big things everyone is a little bit concerned about is how to keep children safe as the pandemic rolls on, as we've seen with the Delta variant. So those are some of the areas that I think people can still continue to be involved in, making sure that those needs are met and that the government is a helpful partner in that space. And so ways that people can continue to get involved, I think, follow any one of us, particularly if there are issues that you care about, see who is advocating for those issues. All of us will probably be out and about in all the communities throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall before we start again at the end of January next year. And I think it's just really important for you to email us, contact us, let us know what you're interested in, let us know what your concerns are, and we will, figure out ways that we can work together.
And Representative Demuth?
Thank you. And the areas that I will continue to be looking at are the achievement gap and the need that we have to meet the needs of our students to give them the best chance at success. Part of that, I think, can also be answered with school choice or opportunity scholarship. So I'll be continuing on in that work. I will also be continuing on in the areas of, like I've mentioned, those earliest learning, the early childhood, and then the child care, both the crisis that we're facing and then how it relates into our workforce. And then definitely community safety across our state, as we're all facing different challenges in each one of our communities. The work that I would like to continue to do is making sure that our communities are safe in the best way. As Representative Agbaje also mentioned, I welcome feedback and information from constituents and Minnesotans. If there's areas that would be helpful for our community that we could work together on or take a look at, I am happy to either meet with somebody, or if you can send me an email or put that on my radar, set up a brief phone call, something like that. Always happy to meet with or have conversations with Minnesotans.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much, Representative Demuth and Representative Agbaje. This has been very enlightening, and we just thank you for your important work that you're doing and that you continue doing, leading our state. So we will now move forward. Well, I think the next agenda item is to actually take a bit of a break here. So we'll recess for 5 minutes and then return with our next panel program.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Hi, Representative Frazier. How are you?
Doing all right. How are you?
Good, good. And I see Senator Champion has joined us as well, so I'm excited about that. I know, and I have to apologize, WebEx has been a challenging tool for us, and we're probably going to switch to something different. I know a couple of people have had some challenges getting in, but we work through challenges, don't we?
That's right.
Senator Champion, so good to see you.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, Representative Frazier. Good evening, Senator Champion.
How you doing, Theo?
I think I finally got this thing working. I'm not sure what's happening here.
Well, we hear you.
Hello.
We see you too.
We see you here. You're not the only one that has had trouble with it, so don't feel like the Lone Ranger out there.
I don't. Thank you.
Okay. So Theo, are you ready for me to get started?
Yes, and Shakira is, I think, recording.
Perfect. Well, welcome to our second panel for this afternoon, this evening. This panel will be on investments in jobs, labor, and economic growth, as well as we're going to touch on human rights and public safety, which is a big issue for us these days. Just to get started, though, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. Let's see, and we're going to start with an introduction. Senator Bobby Joe Champion. Senator Champion of District 59 is currently serving his third term in the Minnesota State Senate. Senator Champion has been serving in the Minnesota Legislature for over 13 years and uses his wealth of experience to advocate for job creation, affordable housing, civil rights, education, economic development, criminal justice reform. Boy, you are busy, Senator Champion.
They keep us busy.
Okay. In the previous session, Senator Champion helped author a number of bills focused on data practice, capital investments, as well as a variety of other policies. Welcome, Senator Champion.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next, we have Representative Cedric Frazier. Representative Frazier of District 45A is currently serving his first term in the Minnesota State House of Representatives, so congratulations. Representative Frazier believes there is no greater job than serving one's own community. He has over a decade's worth of experience as a public defender and New Hope City Council member. In the previous session, Representative Frazier was the vice chair of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform, Finance, and Policy Committee, where he worked to help pass sensible and urgent legislation. Welcome, Representative Frazier.
Be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Linda, and thank you to the senator and the representative. So I think first we want to just start out with allowing you to just provide some introductory remarks on your main takeaways from the important work during the regular session and the special session, and just you know, an overview of your efforts and the concerns that you had and what you thought about the outcomes at the end there. So I'll give the floor to Senator Champion to go first.
Well, let me say thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you just to the council for all of this hard work. You know, as you know, in order for us to be successful, it really takes all of us to work together in order to make sure that we can pass and push and promote meaningful policies that positively impact our community. And when you think in terms of the highlights, it's really difficult because I do believe there's some good things that came about, but it wasn't without a fight. It wasn't without sacrifice, for lack of a better word. And then we could always look at, you know, there being room for improvement, for an example. And I don't know how detailed you want me to go into this, but for an example, a highlight in the job bill, it's sort of bittersweet that there was a provision there for Main Street Economic Revitalization program, roughly $80 million. And that money is to be used for projects or businesses that been having some challenges since March 15th, 2020. I wish that there wasn't a cap on that. And you notice that it did not specifically state Minneapolis and St. Paul and Duluth or all those other areas that had some challenges as a result of George Floyd. But still, I'm grateful for the fact that we got something through that, and that those businesses will be able to take advantage of that. Then also there's a Main Street COVID-19 relief grant program. Another 70 million was put there, and that's for businesses who have not received previous support from the state around COVID-19, and so they would get preference for these funds. And not to mention, they would be grants that you don't have to pay back, but it's randomized selection. And those grants will be based on also employee count. So, but again, just high level until you ask me some specific things. There was some successes around education and higher ed, healthcare, and then just other things that I've already mentioned. But once you ask me some specific things, I will be able to detail that, because I don't want to take up all the time doing my introduction. So I want to leave some time for my good friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Representative Frazier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Senator Champion. Thank you for graciously leaving me some time to do an introduction. Just giving you a hard time. Always good to hear Senator Champion talk about this important work that we do. Just some of my observations from the session. We came in under the backdrop, and this is purely speaking from my lens and my role as Vice Chair of the Public Safety Committee. We came in under the backdrop of the murder of George Floyd. At that time, we were going through the trial prior to Chauvin being convicted of that murder. And then in the midst of the session, we had the killing of Dante Wright. And during those moments, I will tell you, there were times where I thought, for sure, with the spotlight on the state, on the country, and the world watching us, that we would get more done than what we actually got done. Unfortunately, my Senate colleagues did not see it. Senate GOP colleagues did not see it the same way. I know the Senator Champion fought the very good fight, the very hard fight over there, trying to push some police reform and accountability bills through. We did not get as much as we should have, and my personal belief, I believe we fell short of the mark, and and as a legislator, we failed to step up and meet the moment as we should have. I'll talk more in detail about those bills as questions come up. But I do want to say just one thing in this intro, because Rep. Demuth was on earlier in her remarks about education, and I will say that when we don't have the educational outcomes that are better than what they are now, we continue to have these disparate outcomes. That is a direct correlation to what we see with some of our public safety and criminal justice issues that we're facing in the state and frankly in this country altogether. And I will say there were some of the things she spoke to, the protecting teachers of color, targeting resources in an equitable way. There was language, there were bills introduced to do that. And again, that is another example where we missed the mark to take care of some of those areas. So I just wanted to put that here because I believe there's a holistic approach. These things are all interconnected. There's intersectionality, and we must always keep the focus on that fact that these things aren't in a vacuum when we have these conversations just about overall making lives better for all Minnesotans. So thank you for the time of that introduction.
No, thank you for that. Absolutely. And I think that that issue of the intersections and on these issues, I mean the issues facing the public issues definitely are all interconnected, and certainly the issues facing our community, there's a cross section of issues, and there has to be this holistic approach. So we're hoping actually in thinking about the issue of economic investments and the matter of public safety, economic security, and public security, through this discussion with you two leaders, we can get some of that intersectionality going here. So I mean, I guess the first question, I mean, this will be for both of you, but I wanna present it to Senator Champion first. The investments and the support, the COVID support that that you referred to, those dollars that you referred to. I guess the question that I would pose is, I mean, can you tell the community a little bit more about why the support provisions that are in the bill are important? And then you did mention that is if there's definitely some language. There's difference in language between what passed the House, certainly for the jobs labor bill, and then what landed, where the state ended, at the end of the budget negotiations. And so, I mean, I would wonder if you can give us, some, enlighten us on your perspective on that difference, and maybe some of the work that needs to be done in the future regarding that, if there were some shortcomings. Oh, sorry, you're on, you're muted, I believe.
Spin it back around. Okay. You hear me? So let me address it this way. First of all, jobs and economic development is very important. When you think in terms of every disparity that our community is dealing with, it's all around poverty. It's all around quality of life, right? And so ever since I've been in the legislature, what I've been pushing is, how do we make sure that we not only have job creation, but job creation in the areas and places of spaces that need it? And how do we make sure that they are gaining and making a livable wage? So that includes our small businesses. How do we make sure that there are loans, and not just loans, but grants? How do we make sure that there's technical assistance? And how do we make sure that it's throughout the state? Because we have folks on the reservation, we have folks of color all around the state of Minnesota. So that's important. And so ever since 2016, I believe it was, Senator Hayden, who was former Senator Hayden, and I have always pushed an equity bill, right? Always pushed small businesses and BIPOC businesses, but also veterans, because we have Black veterans too, right? And so we really kept that at the forefront. So the information that I attempted to articulate earlier is the result of the bill that came out of the legislature. And let me be clear, Representative Frazier mentioned this earlier. The bills that were initially coming from the Senate were not very people friendly. They were not to move us forward, but thank God that there's a House and that we have a governor who is really pushing and really working hard. So when you think in terms of this title, this is the title that they gave it, Main Street Economic Revitalization Program. That's what it's first $80 million, right? Now, we believe that there should have been direct appropriations and money available for Minneapolis, St. Paul, and other places that were affected by the civil unrest as a result of George Floyd being murdered. We believe that there should have been some direct appropriations there, but this was supposed to be kind of a massage place that folks could land upon. And so that $80 million is available to not just to others throughout the state, but also Minneapolis and St. Paul. And it's for those businesses or real property that were affected since March 15th, 2020. Now that date's important because that correlates with COVID, George Floyd, the whole 9 yards. Then there's another $70 million that is for COVID relief, right? Because there are lots of businesses who did not get any relief from the state, not from the counties, not from the city, and they're sort of left holding the bag, for lack of a better word. And so there need to be some real investments around that. Something else that's important is that in that $70 million, there's $10 million that is designated for minority-owned businesses. Mm. So that's important to us as well. And those grants can be used, and those are grants that could be used for payroll expenses, rent, mortgage payments, utility bills, and other similar expenses that occurred, and for that 70 million since March 13th, 2020. So, and then also in that pool, there's also some money for cultural malls and businesses that are flowing through those cultural malls. There's $8 million for childcare. For local communities who want to increase the number of child care providers in the community. up to $5 million, and there's a required match as it pertains to that. But here's the other thing that is present there. In the jobs bill, and remember I said since 2016, we've been pushing the equity bills. We now got $32.5 million that goes through our community-based organizations across the state, places like the Neighborhood Development Center or Ujama Place, or the YMCA St. Paul, or Summit OIC, Goodwill Easter Seal, Better Futures, African Immigrant, there's an African Immigrant Competitive Grant in the amount of $2 million. All this is going through D. North at Work, foreign trained healthcare workers. We wanted some specific concentration on those communities. And I want to say that Chair Nora did a really good job on the House side, because he's the chair there and he and I worked hard together. But that foreign trained healthcare workers, that's $2 million, 30,000 feet, which is on the east side. We got them some money. The whole idea is just to name a few, is just to show that there's a number of different things going on. Last but certainly not least, there's job training program, but I want to mention Rondo. There's a bridge that we got $6.2 million in order to make the investment for the project development of a land bridge over 94, but between Rice and Lexington. That's the way they put it. Now, some people say, well, how did that end up in this particular bill and not necessarily in capital investment? That's where legislation is sort of like making sausage, right? You go in and there's all sorts of things that get put in different places in order for it to have some success. We had to do that with the Rondo bill. We had to do that with, there's another $24 million for targeted communities that's going through DEED as well. That's outside of the job bill. Another 25 to, I think it's 24 or 25 million, called the targeted community grants for nonprofits and others that folks in our community will be able to benefit from. So that is to just show you that there was negotiation. The House and the governor did a really good job of pushing the GOP in order for them to make these strategic and necessary investments in our community. And there's always room for improvement, right? Even though we can say 32.5 million for equity grants, I think that should be 100 million. I think we should also have goals when we think in terms of capital investment, right? So it's all this money that flows through, and we will continue to fight. But if there's something else specific, I'll certainly answer those questions.
No, thank you very much for that. Representative Frazier, if you want to add some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, just let me just quickly. You know what Senator Champion taught. These were hard fought achievements by I'd say a large part led by Posse Caucus members within the House and on the Senate side as well, fighting as much as they could to either get these bills heard or get amendments added as it's going through the Senate. So very good work on those end. What I will say is, we were going against GOP members that were saying we won't do anything that has the word equity in it. We won't pass any bills that have the terms equity in it. So we did our job, and we made sure we drafted the bills in a way that they were really still focused and targeted, where they would provide for that equity piece. The bills that those community bills, targeted grants that Bobby Joe Champion talked about, was we got language in there to make sure that these are groups that don't ordinarily get these, to make sure we provide access at a broader level. And so it's not the same folks get them, or some large corporations or some large entities or large nonprofits that are coming in, and maybe they work with groups that work in the community, but they're not directly from the community. So we're trying to make sure that ad money and those resources go into the community. And I think this goes to the whole overall picture, right? If we have the more resource communities have less of the issues that our communities are facing. More resource communities have less policing in them. They have less disparities in them. They have better outcomes in their schools. We know that because we look at the data year in and year out, and we see that. If you compare Wayzata to North Minneapolis, the resources there, the fluency there, and you look at the outcomes in those communities. You look at the small businesses in those communities. You look at the non-negative police encounters that happen in those communities. So we know these things are entirely connected, and so that is what we've looked at as a caucus, a posse caucus, in the Black Caucus as well. What we've looked at is how do we influence legislation and that kind of with that global lens on all these things been interconnected. And as Theo, as you said earlier, the intersectionality, and make sure that we're coming with this total package that's going to have an impact globally on our community to make sure that we can have better outcomes. But that's got all I want to add. I just want to chime in on that piece. Thank you.
And I want to make sure that we don't forget the importance of something that Representative Frazier said. It has been our ability and willingness to talk and work with each other first. Because our ability to talk and work with each other allows us to be much more strategic and thoughtful. One good example of that, I'm the DFL lead on jobs and economic growth. Chair Noor is the chair on jobs on the House side. He and I would talk to each other all the time in order to make sure he knew what was happening on my side, I knew what was happening on his side, and we worked in concert with each other and not against. And so we also made a pact that we were not going to just look out for East Africans and not look out for African Americans, right? You know, or Latinos, right? How do we make sure that we all are working and pushing together? Because only under those circumstances will we be as successful as we have been. And last point, I know that Representative Frazier was working hard on the police stuff, along with Carlos Mariani. We were always hearing what they were doing over there. We knew what they were doing. We knew what pushing they were doing, and we knew what we had to do on the Senate side, even being in the minority. How do we hold up the floor and articulate the real issues that are important to us? Because we cannot silo these issues, because they must be dealt with comprehensively. The moment you start siloing them, you're going to lose.
That's real.
Just one last point. I swear this is the last point. I think Senator Champion, you mentioned this earlier. I think we were talking about disaster relief. I think you brought this up. But yeah, I was on the House committee where that language came through to basically exclude Minneapolis from disaster relief, and it had a specific time frame to deal with the civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd. Now, what we have to think about is that when you talk about disaster relief, a majority of those funds, a substantial majority of those funds come from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Hennepin County, Ramsey County, where the large populace is, where the tax base is that contribute to those resources. Where a majority of those funds are distributed, they go to greater Minnesota. Now, I don't have a problem with that, because we have to take care of our entire state, and that's the way this works, right? If we didn't have those resources, they wouldn't be able to rebuild after they had disasters in greater Minnesota. And it should not be any different when we talk about situations that happen in the metro area. And that is when I'm saying, they didn't want to talk about equity, but they're okay with equity when it goes to greater Minnesota. And we cannot do that, because what that says to me, and it's a dog whistle, it's okay for our folks, but it's not okay for your folks. And we cannot legislate that way.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I want us to get into questions about the public safety bill, and Femi will lead us off on that. But before we go on that, I wanted to just ask Senator Champion, and also if you have some more details about this, Representative, the issue of support for the issue of support for minority-owned businesses, that language that's in the I believe in the jobs bill. Was there any discussions in terms of specific? I think in the House version of the jobs bill, there was language that was prioritizing investments in BIPOC communities. So not just the category of minority-owned, which seems to be a broader category, but the specific matter of communities of color. Some of that, that specific language. And I'm wondering if there were any discussions around that, just briefly. And then also, if you can give us those numbers, those figures that you listed off there. 32 million that you mentioned in deed funds to community And then also you mentioned 25 million in targeted community grants that you said was outside of the deed. So if you can just clarify some of that details, that would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you. So first and foremost, yes, we've always had this conversation about BIPOC communities and there being some preferences given there, right? As Representative Frazier articulated, that is also a part of the fight, right? Because we've constantly fought over those things. But what is in the bill? There's a job training program, for an example, that provides grants of up to $200,000 to new or expanding employers' jobs for economically disadvantaged people and for people of color, right? So that's language that they could massage and get with. So you also asked me specifically about the equity fund. So that's $32.524 million. And we specifically named organizations throughout the state who have presented some bills. We wish that there was more money. The reason why we name specific states, specific organization is because, as Representative Frazier and I agree on, is that there's historically been a concerted disinvestment in our communities, and the money would usually go to organizations that are paper tigers, but then they end up not subletting, but subdealing with or subcontracting with someone else. And so they get the administrative dollars and they get the credit, but those who really need the administrative dollars and the support don't end up getting it. So those are the equity funds. And we've been doing that since 2016. And there have been people who wanted to take away that ability for us to name specific organizations and just wanted to be competitive grants. But I subscribe to the notion, why can't we name and still have competitive grants? Why does it have to be one or the other? We don't say it's one or the other. When I look at how much money that we spend in this bill, right? There's organizations named in it up and down. And so that's $32 million. And then there is that 25 million, I want to say 24, it's between 24 and 25 million that was in the tax bill that was pushed by Chair Lee and all of us in order to have money and grants for targeted community organizations, which can include but not limited to nonprofits, right? So that is where that 25 million is. And then outside of that 25 million, I did tell you about Main Street economic revitalization that's in the job bill for 80 million. Then the other 70 million is for COVID relief, which is 70 million. And it breaks it down further in the bill. Like, for an example, when you think in terms of 80 million, they said only no more than 65% can go to either metro or non-metro. It can't be like the whole thing goes to one or the other, right? So that's the other play that they were playing in order to make sure that we didn't get everything that we need. So those are some of the things, and I hope I answered your question. I answered the question about BIPOC, and yes, we continue to have that discussion because minority-owned businesses can be so expansive that can include other people, but we want to be very specific, and we were specific around a number of these things, but we'll continue to be as specific because we must be.
Thank you very much for that. I want us to get into the public safety and human rights part of this discussion. So Femi, you want to lead us off with the first set there for the panelists?
Sure. So this first question is for Representative Frazier. I'm going to start off by saying thank you for your leadership and your work on the public safety and police reform legislation. So to start off, the issue of police accountability has really become a hot button issue. But can you tell us how you approach this issue? And are civil and human rights important for public safety?
Thank you, Femi. Yes, absolutely. Civil and human rights are important for public safety. When we respect, and I'm speaking to our law enforcement officers, when we respect human rights and we respect civil rights, I expect better interactions and better engagement with those communities that you are policing, that you have taken, and what I always call that sacred oath to protect and serve. The accountability piece is, if you have the accountability piece, you're more likely to have trust from those communities, knowing that if you violate that sacred oath to protect and serve, which means violate civil rights or human rights, or constitutional rights for that matter, that you're going to be held accountable for that. what we've seen is far too often that we don't have that accountability. The conviction of Chauvin was a rare moment where we had accountability, a rare moment. Think about that. It's a rare moment when we're seeing that it's not very rare that we have situations where we have the allegations of excessive force. We have police shootings that are leaving engagement with community members and those community members dead after the fact. But we have rare moments like that with the conviction, the murder conviction of Chauvin, that held an officer accountable after taking those excessive actions and leaving someone murdered. So though, to me, those things are very important. They're integral to building the public safety system that can work for everyone, that where people should feel safe, and they're also where people can feel comfortable and trusting that if there is a violation of that public trust, that sacred trust to protect and serve, that there will be accountability. And my approach to that was just that. It was engaging with, to say, not just me, but the committee being led by Chair Carlos Mariani, engaging with the stakeholders. We believe that all the stakeholders and interested parties should be at the table. But what we also believe is no one should have veto power. And absolutely, the law enforcement associations and departments and officers should not have veto power, because we're talking about changing the system that they have been a part of, that has been in this situation for so long, where communities feel like there's a lack of trust and that there's not accountability. So we didn't want to see those folks having the ability to veto or hold up any type of legislation that would create a better public safety system. Again, I'll state, and I'll be honest and upfront, is that we didn't go as far as we should have gone, considering the moment that we're in right now.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Representative. I want to also I want to add a question, I think, for both you and Senator Champion, just on that last point. The bill, the public safety bill, that the budget that passed at the end of June. If you can give us your takeaway of the, when it comes to specifically on the issue of police reform or police accountability reform, the measures in it, whether it be 1, 2, or 3, that you think are important, that actually landed in that bill. I know one key aspect was the data collection reform. If you can speak to what your main takeaway from that bill, things that are important, and then also maybe even more important for us now moving forward, what for both of you are some top 3 public safety areas or measures that you think that Minnesota should take action on moving forward?
So I'll go quickly so Senator Champion has time. The data collection piece was important. I would say before I joined the legislature, the posse legislation that was passed, led by Posse Caucus, and particularly strong, heavy lifting by Chair Moran, there was the early warning system was put in place, which is what it's called. That's where the Post Board collects this data, and through that data, they're supposed to maintain and track and basically see if there are any officers that may be having a situation that would be trending toward a tragic situation, like what happened with Officer Chauvin murdering George Floyd. The problem with that was that it didn't allow for the Post Board to get access to actual private personnel data, which would be the data that they actually need access to show the trend. What it had allowed for was just public data. Now, we all can get access to public data. We just need to go in and make a data request at the local police department, and they have to turn that data over if it's public data. The personnel data, the private data, is important because what it showed with Chauvin is that he had like 18 prior complaints that were private. And in those 18 prior complaints, some of them were very similar to the actions that he had taken against George Floyd that led to his murder and to the death of George Floyd. The idea now is that with this early warning system, the Post Board would be able to see that and intervene to try to ensure that officer doesn't continue down that path, or that officer doesn't continue as someone with a license to be an officer in the state of Minnesota. That was important. what we didn't get the traffic, the pretextual stop bill, which could eliminate some of these interactions, these negative interactions that escalate. So similar to what happened with Dante Wright, I thought that would have made a direct and significant impact right away because it would have stopped those some of those interactions. And what we need moving forward, I want to see us move a lot forward in giving the post board more authority and have them push them to take more action in intervening with police discipline and accountability from their end. What I always say is they give the license and they also should take the license away, and they have to be able to do that. Almost every other licensing board in the state of Minnesota is active, very active. The teachers licensing board, social workers licensing board, Senator Champion, even us as lawyers. If someone files a complaint against us, it's likely going to be looked into. If there's any credibility, it's going to be investigated, and there could be action taken against our license. And we would not be able to be able to go in court and represent anyone. It would take away our livelihood for that, right? This is the same type of thing that the post board should be doing for officers that are misbehaving and violating that oath. For me, it is a part of the action that can be taken to change this system by creating that level of accountability. And the way I look at it is that you have the police chiefs to create a better culture on the front end and those police departments. And then you have the checks and balances with the post board that can do some investigations and take actions on that officer license. Because in this state, if you don't have a license, you cannot be a police officer, and they could take those officers off the street and stop them from committing harm in those communities.
One of the things that I would say, just building off what Representative Frazier said, is when you think in terms of even the chiefs, there was a task force that was put together by Attorney General Ellison and others about a year or so ago, even before some of these things came up. And those chiefs of police, came up with some things that they needed more support around that would improve, police officers. Like, for an example, do you not realize that a chief can fire someone, and then because of the lack of insight and a quality arbitration system, they pick the arbitrator that they want and end up getting put back on the police force? So now you got tension because now you got a line officer who can look at a chief and say, you can't do anything to me. So therefore they don't have any power. I do think that there should be residency. At least people should be able to look at residency, because I do believe that when people live in your community, they treat it differently because you are a member of that community. And so I think that residency requirement is something that we should really look at. I think that there are certain things that should be secondary offenses. One, something hanging, but you know what also should be a secondary offense? What used to be a secondary offense? If you didn't have a seatbelt on. There was a time it wasn't a primary, it was a secondary. But now that it's a primary, many people get stopped and they can say you didn't have your seatbelt on, right? And how do you prove that you really had your seatbelt on, right? So I think along with something hanging from your air freshener and those things should be secondary offenses and not primary offenses. I also think that it's telling that the GOP in the Senate did not want to put language in the bill that says a police officer cannot be a part of a racist institution or a racist group. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Do you think that we would want someone who's an active, paying member of the KKK or the skinheads or the Proud Boys to be a part of our police force? There should definitely be something there. We need to revisit the use of force and training. And last but certainly not least, some of the other suburbs have a model that I think we should give some credence to, which is they have these multidisciplinary models, where if someone calls because someone's having a mental health episode, that there's someone who is a mental health trainer or expert, for lack of a better word, can go and accompany them and help talk the person down or give the police insight. Because the whole idea is that if we do not develop the trust between our community and the police will not be able to do the quality job to solve some of the challenges that we have even in our community. Because who's going to want to trust the police and tell them anything? I heard another police officer say, hey, we got to do something about those bad apples because they make it difficult for those of us who want to do the right thing. You know, and so I think that is important. And last but certainly not least, because my good friend Representative Frazier has touched on respect and trust and accountability and all the other good stuff, and all of us want to be safe and secure, but we need to focus the discussion so that we are not talking about we don't like the police, because we didn't say that. I know in North Minneapolis that we don't say that. We got to focus the discussion around the fact that we want the police to serve and protect and not to govern and abuse us. That's the difference. In North Minneapolis, they would say, hey, I'm not talking about defunding the police. I just want to make sure if I call the police, they're going to come, number one. And number two, that they're going to treat me respectfully and not as if they're in a war zone. So I think we have to focus the discussion, because we are allowing us all to be used as a political basketball for one side to say, oh, they want to defund the police. They don't really like the police. That's not true. We just deserve treatment, better treatment, humane treatment, and for them to see us as a valuable member of the society as we see them.
Let me just quickly, I want to speak to that. Senator Champion made me think of something. I just recently met with a couple of police chiefs, and we talked about, I try to keep an open dialogue, and I just understand what is it that you want to help you, help you be successful. And one of the things we focused on was that the work that we're trying to do with this legislation, it is to raise their profession. It is also the most important thing I want them to know. I think about this because I work a lot with educators, and I think about how we have put a lot on our educators in terms of solving some of the issues that we have in society, and they are not trained to do that, right? So it takes a village, because they're not trained to do that. This is the same thing that happens with law enforcement, right? If you don't know who to call, you call 911. Not necessarily because they have subject matter expertise in dealing with that. And the thing that comes to mind is mental health crises that happen, right? And Senator Champion was talking about that. We should be making sure that we put resources in place in a public safety system where we can put people in the right positions to have the best possible outcome. And the best possible outcome is everybody goes home at the end of the day. That's the best alive. That's the best possible outcome, right? And that is where we need to be focused in this conversation. I have said time and time again that unfortunately, our colleagues on the GOP side, they have chosen the best political argument, the best political position to maintain or gain election certificates. They have not chosen the best position to make sure that we have what's best for all Minnesotans. And that became more clear to me when we were going through these discussions and negotiations, when we had law enforcement officers and certain associations saying, we want to see change happen. We are okay with a majority of what you have in your bills because we believe it is going to change things in our profession for the better. And our GOP colleagues resoundingly said, no, we're not going to make those changes. Those changes are anti-law enforcement. Those changes are going to make their jobs harder, when we had law enforcement associations on the record saying otherwise. So those are political arguments. Those are not arguments that are in the best interest of Minnesotans, and particularly BIPOC communities.
I hope that you all understand this. On the Senate side, what is really disappointing to me, and when you said earlier, what are some things that, I wish was different, right? And it's really through this lens in which I'm making this statement. One of the beautiful things about the legislature is when you can sit at that table and a cross section of people can come to the dais and you be engaged in robust discussions about a particular issue, all with a mind towards how do we create or write public policy that's going to be beneficial? How do we do it? Is there a pathway by which to do it? Sometimes we even make sides talk to each other. Say, oh, well, you all better talk to each other, because if you don't, then we're going to do it ourselves. And that gives them the incentive that they need. And then unfortunately, we were not having hearings on not even half the things that Representative Frazier has talked about. Not one hearing. So when they get up and say, oh, we think this, they're saying that just based on their own position, not because they've talked to anyone. And if they have talked to someone, it is in an echo chamber because they did not invite or welcome other people to sit at the table so we can have this real important dialogue. What's lost is that ability and the artful opportunity to sit and talk about these critical issues, and even for you all to weigh in, because one of the things that the councils are supposed to do is give advice and counsel to us on these critical issues. But how can you do so if we don't even have a hearing, if we don't even discuss these things? So I would just encourage us to be a part of the discussion and be a part of pushing people to do the right thing, because the souls of our great state are at risk.
That's really, really important. There's there's a critical issue. I mean, that's tied to precisely these previous points that you guys have made that I want us to at least touch on before we have to close here, and that is the thing that we started with regarding the intersection and the intersectionality of these issues. So, I mean, we have a difficult time in Minnesota and probably around the country really thinking about issues of police accountability reform on the one hand, and then thinking about the matter of community safety, you know, how strategies for community to community violence prevention. So, I mean, thinking about matters of investments in our community, in youth development, et on the one hand, and then thinking about the matter of investing in improving policing and our public systems. And I just think this is an opportunity that, you know, to get you guys thinking on that connection and on how we should go about thinking about that connection and approaching that connection in the state. And if you have ideas about the ways that in the future or maybe even in the past, how legislation can help us with that.
Yeah, so we do. I think that is absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that we talked about frequently and often during the legislative session was alternatives to policing. And how do we get a community engaged in helping community solve issues or prevent issues before they become violent, or even just the restoration process if there is violence within the community. To that point, we fought hard for, and we were able to secure 15 million in grants that will be set aside and will be going to community organizations that are working on violence prevention and in community outreach programs for that as an alternative to just calling the police or putting more police in those communities. Some of that money will also go to folks that have been harmed by violence as a part of the restoration process, and also as a way to help those individuals with resources to remove them from those harmful situations. As we know, oftentimes, again, if you have resource communities, you have better outcomes, and you don't need to call in the police as a one-size-fits-all to address every particular issue. So that is a big, and I'm glad you brought that question up, Theo, because I wanted to make sure I talked about that those resources that are going to be out there for community groups to have access to. But I think that's a vital part of this entire thing, right? Because we're over policed, because of those disproportionate interactions or contacts that we're having with police officers, it is leading to many of these negative interactions that are out there. And I do think there are other ways that we should be able to deal with that, and that answer is within our communities.
Well, let me say this. Thank you for that, Representative Frazier. I do agree that there's this intersectionality and there's this place where all these things come together. I think we have to have a paradigm shift, because too often we're siloing these issues and not putting them together. For an example, most people don't think about housing and education. If kids are moving and they're being mobile, the chances of them having stability and having good academic outcomes go down. So the educators, unfortunately, are never talking about housing. And then how about academics and art? When most people think about choir and drums and reading of music, they see it as just a creative outlook. But there was a Harvard study that said, wait a minute, that creative outlook leads to better academic outcomes when they learn to read music. Or jobs and education. You know that one can almost predict how much you're going to make in a lifetime based on your education. Now, of course, there are always, exceptions to that notion, but that's true. Or crime. where there's economically, we're economically deprived of investments. So we have to also change the paradigm and begin to connect these dots so that if someone's advocating for housing, they can advocate for education. If someone's advocating for education, they can also advocate for housing. And those are just examples. So thank you so much for inviting us, and we will certainly be engaged with you, because it's going to take all of us to do our part in order to move these critical issues forward.
Thank you very much for that. Very, very important points. So Linda, I will turn it over to you for our closing.
Great. Thank you so much. This has just been an amazing discussion. So just since we do have to close it out, I would like to thank Senator Champion and Representative Frazier just for coming out and keeping it real and helping us to understand that it takes all of us to get this work done. And we've got to look at these issues not just as separate issues, but everything is all interconnected. We are all interconnected. So thank you again, Senator Champion and Representative Frazier. And then thank you to those who are listening. It is important that we understand that the issues that we face, that we understand those issues so that we can get engaged and help drive change together. I want to encourage you to stay connected or get connected to the council and to your legislators. They are your champions in this work, in this fight. They are the ones who are bringing your voice, the voice of the people, to the legislature. So let's make sure that we partner with them, whether it's testifying, making calls, sending letters, just, saying, hey, this is what's going on, how can I help? And then also, please lift them up. It's not easy going into a space every day when you know it's going to be a fight, but they do it because they love the communities in which they serve. And they know that the proposed legislation could change the lives of our people. So that's it for tonight. Again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at one of our fall programs. So in the meantime, be safe. As you heard earlier, COVID is no joke. Really, it's out there. And be well and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you so much.
Good night.